Alright, back by popular demand and a whole lot of comments. I'm redoing the video on the complete takedown of the Bodyguard 380. If you actually need to watch me take the slide off, then you're in way over your head, and I really wouldn't recommend you continuing any further than disassembly of the gun. For this, we don't make any modifications or anything to the recoil spring. It's a double spring, which is going to be a lot like a variable power spring, so taking off a coil here or there can give a greater risk of reliability in the firearm. So we're going to leave that as it is. Obviously, we're not messing with the barrel. This is your takedown pin. First things first, a lot of people wanted to see how to take the sights off. Again, you can use a punch. I think I found the easiest one to use was a 5/16 punch. Take a little bit of electrical tape or even just dip it in rubber to help prevent marring of the metal. You can set it on anything. Easiest thing handy is to use pliers. Set it across to give yourself a gap underneath it. Put it right on the edge and you tap down. I've marred up my sights enough, so I finally went and bought a sight pusher, which I use the Uni 2000. Looks like this. Slide the slide into it, tighten it all the way down, and then you can take the sights off just by kind of readjusting them. It's the easiest way to do it, and it's what I would recommend if you're going to do these types of things with your firearms. Once you get the slide adjusted height-wise, you set the little block up, slide it over, and then just keep on twisting as you push the slide off. Slide is now completely off. What I'm going to do is release the tension on the slide. Take it out. And that's what it looks like. This is a little metal plate. It's underneath the slide. That gets removed. There's a little bit of spring right there. The entire piece can come out. First the spring, then your firing pin safety block. For adjusting some of your trigger pull, you can use the spring for the firing pin safety block. What I did was I took 2 coils off and then I stretched it back out to its original length. That still keeps plenty of tension, passive tension for the most part, on the safety block, keeping it downwards, but it also reduces how much pressure it takes to push it up, which is part of the trigger pull. The next part we're going to do is take out the 1/16 pin, retaining pin that's holding your striker in. Goes all the way through. We're going to hit out top to bottom. I'm using a 1/16 punch. Again, I'm just using pliers to give the pin somewhere to go so you're not trying to punch it into your table. On the pin, and pin comes right out. Set that off to the side. Take your punch out. Your extractor will come out. Your extractor spring. So to get the striker out, once you remove the Extractor Spring. There's a small pin in there, so you can see. I'm not sure, it might be too dark, but you should be able to see it on yours. There's a little silver tip. That is a spring, or sorry, a pin. If you give a little bit of tension relief on your striker, take your needle nose pliers, grab onto it, make sure to take your finger and cover up where the striker is. As soon as you pull this pin out, your striker will, under spring tension, pop out. Take that out, and your striker will come out. Then your striker spring is in there. Your striker spring. Again, to not mess up parts, some of these parts look very similar. This is a retaining pin, the one we took out from the slide. It is hollow. It's pretty much just a little bent piece of metal. This was the striker retaining pin that goes in there. It's going to be a lot more silver, and it's also a solid piece of metal. Make sure you tell the difference, because other than that, they are the exact same thing. When you're setting your parts off to the side, make sure not to lose them, and make sure not to mess them up, so you know which goes where. Now onto the frame. Way to take the frame off is punching this hole out and this hole. We're going to do left to right. Again, using pliers so they have somewhere to go. This time I'm going to use a 1/8 punch, a little bit bigger. One pin out. Second pin out. Once you take those two pins out, with a little bit of pressure, set that down underneath. This is your safety. This is your hammer spring, your hammer strut, and the hammer. Okay, this is your trigger housing, you could say. This spring right here is your safety spring. It should not be able to come out. You shouldn't really be able to, there's no reason to take it off, and it should not just fall out. But you can see how it goes. If it does fall out, you can put it back in. Just press it in, or use a flat surface, tap it in. I would use a nylon hammer. This is a hammer designed for gunsmithing. It has a brass head and a nylon head, so it doesn't mar up metal. Okay. If we go to the other side, this is your trigger bar. Hold on to it as you take it off. It really likes to fly because of your trigger spring. If you want to take your trigger out, you can. There's no reason. So this is your trigger return spring, along with the kind of retention pin and lever that holds the spring and the trigger in place. Take your trigger out. Next thing to do, to take off your hammer and your hammer strut. There's that little pin right there. If it didn't already fall out, just a little bit pressure, comes right out. Your hammer, your sear if you want to call it, and your hammer strut. Your hammer strut is connected to your hammer. There's absolutely no reason to take it apart. If you want to smooth your trigger pull a little bit, you can polish down and very, very, very slightly smooth off this little crest right here. Not this large, just that tip right there. That's where the sear will sit in and the trigger will break. If you want to reduce your trigger pull any more, this is your mainspring, your hammer spring you could say. You could take off half a coil or a coil. I have not touched mine yet. I haven't seen the need to. But just polishing down the lip of the hammer was enough to satisfy what I like for the trigger. Reassembly. This is your ejector that sits right next to your safety. It's right there. Next, you can slide your hammer. Make sure you put your sear on your hammer. Looks like that. This is the striking face of the hammer. So when it goes in, go in like this. Once you line it up, take the retaining pin and it just slides right in. Next pieces we're going to put in is your hammer, your trigger, fits right in. There is a groove, so make sure it fits in it. Then take your hammer bar, your trigger bar, line it up. Now you need to hold that down as you go to the other side. Next thing to do is put your slide stop on and your slide stop spring. The straight end, it's going to sit like this, and the straight tip is going to sit right underneath that lead. So if you put that on first, bend in, it'll sit right there. Again, you need to keep pressure on that because they really like to pop off. Last but not least is your safety. It just sits right there. So to get, oops. What I find easiest is to take the entire assembly and hold it upside down and slide the frame onto the assembly. First the other way around. You want this to go right in there. You can see where the hole is. So have it backwards versus forwards. Want to guide it right in. Make sure your trigger gets in. Slide everything on. You need to keep a little bit of downward pressure on it while you start getting your pins in. You won't need the pliers anymore. First pin, second pin. Make sure they're flush. You can countersink them a little bit. Next part is reassembly of your slide. First thing, just in reverse, you're going to take your striker spring. You're going to drop it in there. Make sure you have the right pin. Push pressure on the striker. Next piece is going to be your extractor. And your extractor spring. Goes in first. Extractor. That lip, get underneath there, and then push it down. While holding it down, we're going to do top to bottom again, spring, retaining pin, get it set in place. Hold it down. Once it's set and holding the extractor in, I use the pliers just to give it stability because of that. Again, I'm using the 1/8 punch. It's larger. We use the 1/16 to remove it. 1/8 punch will make sure that it sits perfectly flush. You won't go in too far. If you go in too far, you can get excess wear and friction because the pin's sticking out right there. But you should always make sure that that's not the case. The pin should be slightly recessed into the slide right there. Now we're getting to our final parts. Take our firing pin safety block. Drop that in. firing pin safety block spring. That into its little hole. The covering plate sits flush. We're going to take our sights, start sliding them back on just a little bit. You should be able to get them a little ways on, at least enough to hold everything in place. Then we're going to go back to our sights and slide them right back on. Just got them all set up and aligned. Again, just going to start pushing the sight back in. Once it's about center, you can release the slide, come right out, your sights are on, everything's back together. Your barrel, your recoil springs, slide lock. Always make sure it's unloaded, even though we literally just put it back together. And do a functions check. When you're doing this, you should be hearing 2 clicks. First the sear resetting, then the trigger resetting. We'll shoot again. Any other questions? Just ask.